Hello and welcome. I'm Jono Hayes and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Israel steps up its campaign in Syria as government forces withdraw from Sweida after days of sectarian bloodshed, and the UN Security Council takes notice. Russia hands over 1,000 bodies of Ukrainian soldiers as part of a stalled peace effort, while its forces push deeper into Ukrainian territory. And Trump's handling of the Epstein controversy risks dividing his own supporters, and critics say it could threaten his grip on power. Syrian government forces have completed their withdrawal from Sweida province following days of intense sectarian violence between Druze fighters and Bedouin tribes that left hundreds dead. The pullout is part of a new ceasefire deal that shifts responsibility for security to local Druze leaders and factions. Syria's President Ahmed al-Sharaa has addressed the nation, saying the decision was one that was made to prevent further chaos and to prevent national unity. Here's what he had to say.
But we put the interests of the Syrians before chaos and destruction. So the best choice at this stage was to make a careful decision to protect the unity of our country and the safety of its people, based on the supreme national interest. We decided to assign some local factions and sheikhs the responsibility of maintaining security in Sweida. I stress that this decision stems from our deep awareness of the seriousness of the situation for our national unity, and to avoid the country slipping into a large-scale war.
The violence has already drawn in Israel, which struck Syrian military targets and warned of more actions if the attacks on Druze civilians continue. Now, the United Nations Security Council is weighing in on the escalating crisis. To chat about this more, we're joined from Washington by our political analyst, Hamdi Rifai. Hamdi, thanks for joining us. What does the Syrian army's full withdrawal from the Sweida region actually signal about the government's control and the confidence in that region as well? Is it a sign of weakness, or is this strategic restraint?
It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of restraint and the Syrian government not really having a choice. I don't want to caption that as weakness because there's clearly a plan here by Israel, even before the fall of the Assad regime, to back the Druze for some sort of separatist entity or region in southern Syria. And the way we know that is because we saw that even when Assad was still in power, that when the Druze were marching in the streets and demonstrating against the Assad government, it was the only place where Assad did not go to crush the rebellion. Now what we're seeing is Hekmet Hajiri, a criminal entity. He's not really a spiritual leader. Let's be careful about that. Really what he is he was a drug trafficker of Captagon for Assad, who now is working for Israel. So what we're seeing is the Syrian government acknowledging that they don't have control of this area and that it is a very touchy situation where if they continue, they will further push Israel to continue with its plan.
Now, we're hearing the security has been handed over to Druze religious elders and to local factions as well. Is that something that's going to maybe decentralise the power of stability that's in the Syrian government right now? Or are they literally just trying to diffuse a sectarian crisis right now?
The Syrian government, again, it's done it because they're trying to diffuse an escalation of the situation with Israel, not with the Druze, with Israel. The fact of the matter is that now that they have withdrawn, what we're seeing is an increase in sectarian fighting. So in the last 4 hours, what we've seen is that the Druze, we're calling them the Druze, but this is really just one militia, the Hekmet Hajiri militia, has engaged in a mass slaughter of Arabs who everyone has been calling the Bedouins. So what we're seeing is sectarian fighting that isn't really a matter of sectarian fighting. It's really a matter of a criminal militia trying to retain its control and power over the region to continue its drug trade and to continue its arms trade and theft of materials, etc.
As things currently stand, how significant is Israel's role in the escalation that we're seeing? And also on the withdrawal as well, is Tel Aviv setting somewhat red lines for Syria's internal deployments?
This is purely an escalation by Israel. If the Syrian state were allowed to continue in the area, it would be able to bring control to the area. Israel has chosen to create a vacuum, contrary to the U.S. interests, contrary to U.S. policy, contrary to what Trump and the whole rest of the world has chosen to do with Syria, which is give the Syrian government an opportunity to create stability. Israel has decided that it doesn't want stability. It wants to continue this pattern of war so that it can continue its military dominance over the region.
How likely is this to spread beyond the Sweida region? 350 people reportedly killed, United Nations holding these emergency meetings that we're hearing so much about. How far could this really go?
Well, it already has spread, and it's spreading, towards the east and towards the west. And, the idea here is for Israel to create areas that are outside of the Syrian government's control and maybe even connect to the Kurdish areas currently controlled by the SDF. It's creating a destabilization where sects are allowed to rule and control areas based on ethnic background or religious affiliation rather than state government control. Israel's trying to keep Syria in the Stone Ages rather than to allow it to be a modern nation state with many ethnicities, with many religions, where the state defines a unified role for the people.
Do you think there's a political risk for President Ahmed al-Sharaa in making this move? Is this going to cost him some credibility? Or do you think it actually could boost his standing with some of the minority groups?
It clearly boosts his standing amongst Syrians, because as much as Syrians are upset at what is occurring, they understand Israel has already completely destroyed Syria's air force. We have no ability to fight Israel. There's no argument about that. And no Syrian wants continued fighting. In fact, Syria has gone through extensive efforts to try to create a normalization to whatever degree that could be possible with Israel through its meetings in Baku, Azerbaijan, through Turkish mediation, through Saudi Arabia's efforts, through the United States, through Tom Barak's efforts. Syria has done everything possible to de-escalate the situation. On the world stage, most of Europe and the United States back this Syrian government and understand that the only hope for stability in the region is Ahmed al-Sharaa and the new Syrian government. So they don't support what Israel is doing, and they now see Israel as the instigator, the belligerent, creating the violence, the political vacuum, the instability in the region.
There will be still some of the minorities within the region which will say that they're not represented in the 23-seat government, of which we've seen just one being given to the Druze minority. Is this something that is an obstacle that can be overcome? Do you see the president actually actioning and working on this? Or do you think that there's going to be deep-rooted...
I don't think it's an obstacle that should be overcome. Syria is not Lebanon. Nobody in Syria seeks the creation of a sectarian government that is defined by religion or ethnicity or heritage of any kind. Again, all Syrians seek a modern nation state where people of any religion are able to participate in that state. There was no litmus test by Ahmed al-Sharaa to choose the current government based on the people's religions or otherwise. He chose people based on power interests, qualifications, and what they could bring to bringing stability to Syria. Now, the most of the minorities have unfortunately been groomed over years and years, over 50 years, to believe that they should be afraid of Sunnis, of Arabs, of Muslims. And so that's why we see this continued concern. But in reality, Ahmed al-Sharaa has taken every measure possible to assure them, include them, meet with them, do what they ask. So this should not be something that any government wants to see, where Syria starts appointing people based on religion or ethnic background.
Hamdi, I want to thank you very much for joining us as well. Hamdi Rifai, thank you.
God bless you. Thank you for having me on.
Please appreciate it. Russia says it has returned the bodies of 1,000 Ukrainian soldiers as agreed during last month's talks in Istanbul, one of the very few diplomatic outcomes amid a deadlocked war. Photos posted by a Kremlin aide show body bags being lifted from trucks in what's been described as a humanitarian gesture. But on the battlefield, Russia claims new gains across 3 regions, expanding its summer offensive. That's despite the US pressure for a complete ceasefire. For more on this, we're joined by our Moscow correspondent, Dasha Chernyshova. Dasha, thanks for joining us. Why has Russia handed over 1,000 Ukrainian bodies now? And why has Ukraine only returned 19? What is the message behind this imbalance that we're seeing?
Well, those swaps of the bodies of the dead soldiers is a part of the arrangement that have been reached by the negotiation teams from Russia and Ukraine during the second round of direct talks between the sides. And we understand that Moscow is ready to hand over more bodies to the Ukrainian side as a gesture of goodwill and a humanitarian one as well. And obviously the ratio that we are seeing, 1,000 bodies returned from Russia to Ukraine and 19 from Ukraine to Russia, means that the losses on the Russian side are significantly less than on the Ukrainian. And Moscow has been stressing for months now that the Ukrainian army has been losing more soldiers on the battlefield, while Russia has never disclosed the exact number of its own losses during the course of the so-called special military operation in Ukraine. And the hope in Moscow is that once the exchange of those bodies is complete, then the sides will be talking finally about the exact date for the third round of talks to be held between Moscow and Kiev. And the Kremlin has also been saying that Kiev is no rush to announce that date. So finally now the understanding in Moscow is that once this exchange is complete, they will be talking about more talks, especially now that there's been the 50-day deadline introduced by the American administration, although Russia has seemingly ignored that deadline. But obviously the hope is that talks will continue.
Dasha, talks about talks is very much what this ceasefire agreement seems to have been. And if they haven't led to a ceasefire just yet, what is the real purpose of these negotiations? Are they symbolic? Is this strategic, or is there a level of humanitarianness to this?
Well, as Russia understands, those negotiations should be addressing the root causes of this conflict in order to yield some concrete results. And ceasefire could be part of the wider deal with Ukraine, not the other way around. Ukraine has been insisting that a ceasefire should be introduced, and Moscow has been saying that the call for that 30-day ceasefire or any other ceasefire in Ukraine without the wider security deal would only be allowing the Ukrainian army time to regroup, rearm, remobilize, something that Moscow says it cannot accept to take place at this stage, as Russia has the upper hand on the battlefield. So we understand that from the Russian perspective, those talks were initiated by Russia, and Moscow was hoping that they will be yielding result. But as time goes by, we are seeing that the sides have exchanged their memorandums of the projects of how they see the end to this conflict being introduced, but no progress has been made on that track. In the meantime, we are indeed seeing some humanitarian gestures. We have seen the exchange of the badly wounded soldiers by both sides. We've seen the return of the prisoners of war, and we've seen the exchange of the bodies of the dead soldiers. And indeed, the two sides have managed to exchange those memorandums, something that should be discussed during the third round of talks. But again, we are not hearing more progress being made on that track just yet.
You mentioned when we spoke a few minutes ago in relation to the imbalance between the bodies that we have seen returned, and that may be to do with the actual death toll. And Russian armed forces 400 to 500, whereas Ukrainian forces 4,400 have been killed, but pro-Russian forces 6,500 have been killed as well. That imbalance is quite worrying. So what does this, because it is a strategic body exchange more than anything else, what does this say about the scale of losses on both sides?
Well, it is really difficult to understand the real numbers behind the words that we are hearing from both Moscow and Kyiv, because in Moscow there's been the strategy of not announcing those numbers, as Russia is not holding the large-scale mobilization. There has been the partial mobilization announced back in 2022, and ever since then Moscow has been attracting those contract fighters to its operation in Ukraine, and there's been no clarification as to what exactly have the Russian losses been. On the Ukrainian side, there have also been many claims, and it is also difficult to estimate those numbers. Moscow suggesting that Ukraine is losing more soldiers on the battlefield. But interestingly, Russia is now advancing, and some of the political and military analysts here in Russia have been suggesting that Russian losses could be increasing because Russia is advancing. But this is also something that Moscow says it is ready for, because it does need to achieve its goals in Ukraine by the military means in the absence of the progress on the diplomatic front. But all in all, indeed, the military experts have been suggesting that the Ukrainian losses are many times more than those on the Russian side.
And you mentioned the advancement of Russia there, Dasha. We are seeing, while this body exchange is going on, simultaneously, Russia makes gains in 3 Ukrainian villages. So what the right hand is doing, the left hand can't see. But is that a shift in momentum on the part of Moscow?
Well, that's been actually the tendency that we've been seeing over the course of the past months, with Russia saying that they are indeed making gains, that they have finally completely liberated Lugansk region, which Moscow claims as its own. It's actually not the first time that Russia is speaking about the complete liberation of the Lugansk region. But we also know that Moscow has been making gains on other directions, in the Zaporizhia region, in the Kharkiv region, the areas that have not been previously discussed as the military goals. But Russia says it is now also working on the establishment of the so-called sanitary or buffer zone on the territory of Ukraine to prevent the Ukrainian long-range missiles from getting to the targets inside Russia. And interestingly, the Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova, who has been given the briefing early in the day, was also saying that Moscow believes the Western countries that are supplying those weapons to Ukraine as being directly involved into this conflict, because the use of those long-range missiles is simply impossible because without the intelligence and the satellite data from those countries. And therefore, Moscow says the creation of this sanitary zone is something that will be ensuring the security of Russia, again, in the absence of the progress on the diplomatic front.
Dasha Chernyshova, who is with us from Moscow, thank you so much for talking to us today. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. A massive fire at the newly opened shopping mall in the eastern Iraqi city of Al-Kut has left at least 61 people dead, while 11 others are missing. Late on Wednesday, the blaze broke out on the first floor before spreading across the mall. 3 days of mourning have been announced and an investigation has been launched. The US Army said that a Yemeni military group had seized the largest haul of advanced Iranian weapons in its history. Yemeni forces have intercepted more than 750 tons of munitions and hardware, such as aircraft missiles. The US Central Command said that they found systems manufactured by a company that is affiliated with Iran's Ministry of Defense. The US has signed a nuclear energy deal with Bahrain, which it is expected to achieve energy security in the Gulf nation. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the US is willing to work with nations that want a nuclear energy program that does not threaten the security of neighbouring countries. And finally, a huge fire has destroyed the main stage at Tomorrowland Festival in the town of Boom in Belgium just 2 days before the event was set to open. No festival campers were on site at the time that the fire broke out, and our prosecutors have opened an investigation but said the fire appears to be accidental. The festival is still set to open this Friday and host 200,000 people. In South Korea, at least 4 people are dead and more than 1,000 were evacuated after parts of the country were hit by the heaviest rain since records began. Landslide alerts were also raised to the highest level for several regions, while hundreds of schools were also shut. Patrick Falk has this report.
Well, the South Chungcheong region to the south of the capital, Seoul, was hardest hit by the torrential rain. Reports say the area has seen downpours measuring more than 400 millimetres since Wednesday. According to weather agencies, some of the levels of rainfall haven't been seen in more than 100 years. The extreme conditions are wreaking havoc across different parts of the country. Emergency personnel were out clearing highways that became blocked because of fallen trees. There have been widespread reports also of people struggling to clean up and of the damage it's caused to people's homes and many businesses as well. The reports also saying among the dead was a man who drowned in his submerged car after telling his wife on the phone that his vehicle was being swept away by floods. Rescue personnel are said to have discovered the victim in his 50s and then declared him dead at a medical center. Another driver was killed after a roadside wall collapsed in Osan City. The 10-meter high wall collapsed and trapped one car while partially burying another, according to local fire services. South Korea is regularly hit by heavy rains and flooding during the summer monsoon period, but it is typically well prepared. Some reports have raised questions about the adequacy of flood prevention measures. In the same month last year, parts of the country were also hit by intense downpours. At the time, authorities said something like that only occurred every 200 years. Then previously in 2023, at least 40 people died after a week of heavy rainfall. Then President Yoon Suk-yeol said at the time that these sorts of extreme weather conditions were becoming the norm and that South Korea really couldn't afford not to take measures. In 2022, the country earmarked 2 trillion won, or about $1.4 billion US dollars, for disaster prevention.
Donald Trump is facing growing backlash, not from Democrats, but from within his own base, over his shifting response to the Epstein files. In a fiery Truth Social post, he lashed out at both political opponents and supporters, calling them gullible for buying into what he refers to as a hoax. But with the polls showing broad public demand for transparency, the issue is testing the limits of Trump's influence, even amongst his most loyal allies. For more on this, we're joined from Washington by our correspondent, Sarah Firth. Sarah, this really is the story that just doesn't go away. The Epstein controversy back to the fore once again. Why? Why now?
Yes, so Jono, this was sparked by a Department of Justice memo that came out saying there was no evidence of a client list. This relates to the purported documents that the government supposedly has around disgraced sex offender Jeffrey Epstein and the details of what went on. Now, despite the fact that you had Attorney General Pam Bondi previously saying she had the details of that list on her desk for review, they've now backtracked, and so this Department of Justice memo saying there is no client list, but there have been rumours for years that there have been famous friends, wealthy people tied up in this scandal. So there has been this huge rift now amongst the grassroots supporters of MAGA, Donald Trump on the right, who are calling for more transparency here. And as you said, President Trump himself really lashing out here. He called those supporters amongst his own MAGA allies who are calling for transparency, calling for more information here. He called them weaklings. He said they've fallen for a Democratic hoax. Jono, this was a president who ran on a platform of taking on the establishment and mentioned many, many times the fact that he promised to release the Epstein files. So this has really reignited the debate and honestly actually fury from many amongst President Trump's own MAGA supporters on the right.
So what's at stake here, Sarah, for President Trump? So he's reacting obviously very sharply to members of his own fan base, and the MAGA hardcore fans are what's getting it in the neck from President Trump on Truth Social. What's really at stake?
Yes, President Trump is clearly trying to control the narrative here, the MAGA narrative, and things are spiraling out of control, frankly. He's come out very, very strongly supporting the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, saying she's handled this wonderfully. He clearly wants the chapter closed on this. He said on Truth Social, very harsh statement aimed at his own supporters that the scam from the Democrats now is what we will forever call, he said, the Jeffrey Epstein hoax. And my past supporters who've bought into this, hook, line and sinker. As I said, this is really causing a massive division amongst the grassroots MAGA base who have supported President Trump and his anti-establishment agenda, voted for him to come back for a second term. And there is really outrage, not just among those in the base, but very powerful conservative figures as well, the likes of Laura Loomer, the likes even within his own Republican Party of Mike Johnson and former Vice President Mike Pence, calling for more transparency. Now, amongst Republicans, they are treading cautiously here so as not to ignite the wrath of President Trump. But clearly there are these growing calls now for this to be handled differently. And this attempt by the Department of Justice to shut this down, say there is no evidence of a client list, that is simply not satisfying that core MAGA base who've been supportive of President Trump when he was running on a platform of saying that he would release the evidence, and now trying to do this U-turn saying that it's a scam, it's a Democrat scam, don't play into it. But clearly that is not reining that narrative in. And as I said, that's sort of spiraling out of control at the moment.
Sarah, we've covered the MAGA supporters, we've covered his own political party, but what's happening there in Washington on Capitol Hill? Are we likely to see more of a political fallout from this?
Yes, it's likely. The Democrats are pushing really, really hard here. They've put forward a letter calling for the Attorney General Pam Bondi, calling for FBI Director Kash Patel to have to potentially release more information that they have or to testify in front of Congress when Congress is back from recess after August. Both of those calls gaining momentum and finding, as I said, some signs of Republican support as well, which the Democrats would need to force any kind of disclosure from the Department of Justice. But yeah, Jono, this isn't going away very clearly. You are potentially going to see further scrutiny of the actions of the Attorney General and FBI Director. Remember, both of them, as well as President Trump in the past, have spoken about what they believed was this conspiracy of silence around the Epstein files, that the client list potentially was protecting wealthy, powerful individuals in the elite. And now they've had to backtrack on that as well. It's a very embarrassing U-turn that the Republicans are having to make right now. And clearly, not all of the Republicans on Capitol Hill are on board. So yes, it is very likely that we're going to see further action, because the Democrats aren't going to let this go. And Trump's own base are also very unhappy. So you've got a bipartisan momentum behind this latest saga.
Sarah Firth joining us live from Washington. Thank you so much. Now, China's PopMart is set to see its profits soar, with earnings expected to jump more than threefold in the first half of this year. The company, which is famous for its collectible Labubu dolls, which are sold in mystery blind boxes, has seen explosive global demand, especially in the US. Celebrity endorsements and partnerships alike with big brands have helped fuel the resale market, where some of these dolls will sell for hundreds of dollars. But how exactly did these dolls, seemingly out of nowhere, take the world by storm? To answer this question, I hope, we're joined by journalist Chuck Nwosu, who is live from Albert this evening. Chuck, thank you for joining us. A conversation I've really wanted to get into. PopMart and their profits are set to soar by 350%. What does this really tell us about the power of brand hype and also the limited edition culture of today's consumer market?
Well, I think your figures show it. It's gone up they're up from last year by 350%. The company's now worth something like $40 billion and counting. I mean, it tells us that hype as a business model really works. in a market full of choice, brands that build exclusivity and emotional connection, well, they win. I mean, PopMart's success shows just how scarcity, storytelling, and aesthetic appeal, it can turn toys into status symbols. Especially amongst this Gen Z, who are collectors who just crave unique, shareable experiences.
Chuck, the blind boxes that we're seeing, because they arrive, obviously you don't know what is inside before you open it, and the box gives you an indication as to what these actual dolls are. But it's been compared by some to gambling. This marketing model may be crossing an ethical line because it is targeting a younger buyer. Would you think that's fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. Someone said it flirts with the same dopamine, mechanics as gambling. The thrill of the unknown keeps people buying over and over again. When kids or teens are, their primary target becomes ethically murky. It's time maybe we should ask ourselves if this surprise-based marketing needs a kind of regulation. But how would you regulate something that is global, where you would need cross-country appeal? And then the other thing, John, I've got to say that, I've got two kids who are grown up. And when you think of the vices that face this Gen Z generation, vaping, drugs, alcohol, if you were to say to me that actually my two kids were busy collecting figurines instead of doing any of that other stuff, I would say that was an acceptable addiction. So, they face an awful lot of vices. I think, to me, this is an acceptable addiction.
And I tend to agree with you, had I not known about the incredible markup that we're seeing on some of these dolls, with the recommended retail price at around $10. And some of them are going for hundreds and hundreds of dollars. And I guess parents are under this immense pressure to have to pay for this for their kids. We're seeing celebrity endorsements from Kim Kardashian, Lisa from Blackpink, she's endorsed this as well. So this is a mix of two things. It's either clever marketing or genuine product appeal. Which one do you think it is?
Oh, take both of them. And when you say they're going for hundreds of dollars, I think I've seen one go for $13,000. The resale of them has gone absolutely through the roof. I mean, it's a perfect storm, I think, Labubu, of design and celebrity amplification. The products do have a quirky charm about them, and they're collectible. I mean, that's real appeal. But let's be honest. When Kim Kardashian, David Beckham, Rihanna, Blackpink, when these people are buying these, that becomes irresistible. It turns celebrity. That's kind of celebrity sparkle is what turns it from a local into a kind of global trend. It's just not a toy. It's a fashion statement, a social media prop. I mean, I think PopMart's been quite clever, and I think somewhere along the line they may well have employed something like 800 influencers, social media influencers. So it's a bit of both, a good product and then driven by the social media.
We've probably been here before, though, Chuck, as much as we'd hate to admit this. We've seen this with Tamagotchis. We've seen this with Furbies. And we've seen it before that with the previous smaller dolls that were that everyone had for years and years. Yeah, the Beanie Babies. So we've seen this before. Is this craze likely to fizzle out, do you think? Or are Labubus here to stay? Are they the next big collector's obsession?
Well, you're right. I think we've got Beanie Babies, Cabbage Patch Dolls, Tamagotchi. Yeah, Labubu could go either way. It's riding the wave of this trend. But Mark's been quite clever. It's built this kind of real. It's here to stay. This, even if this fizzles out, and judging by their wardrobe of characters, they can generate more. I don't think this is just a one-hit wonder. They're going to keep on evolving characters and tapping into local cultures and global cultures. It could stay hot. And if it doesn't stay hot, what PopMart has shown us is we'll find you something else. But PopMart's problem
What I do think we've seen as well is a large global boom in Asian products and Asian pop culture products across the globe as well. So this really is shaping, I guess, global shipping habits.
Oh, without doubt. I mean, but this may be shaping it, but I think this question has been asked and answered in the past. I mean, Asian pop culture is no longer niche. You know, it's shaping global taste. You know, K-pop, I remember, maybe I'm giving away but Gangnam Style, I remember dancing to that, and no one had ever heard of that one moment. There we were all dancing. You know, consumers around the world are just embracing East Asian design, storytelling, the culture. You know, PopMart is riding this, yeah? And it's figured out that global shoppers, the younger ones, yeah, they're not interested in their back gardens, so to speak. They're looking for trends beyond their country to other regions and to Asia.
What would you say?
And also, I also think this would be cool for China. I mean, when you think of the negative publicity that China is generating at the moment, the idea that people are buying loads of their products almost sells China into a kind of, China's cool. You know, China's got these products coming, and look, even the kids are using them.
Chuck, on an educated guess, what's next for Labubu? What do you think they will do next to try and keep this momentum going? Because otherwise it is at risk of fizzling out quite quickly.
Oh, Jono, I can't believe you're saying that, because it turned, I mean, I'm looking at the figures, and PopMart isn't big in the biggest market for toys. The biggest market for toys is the USA. Yeah. So I think there's a lot more mileage to go on Labubu. Yeah. PopMart is now, I think it's got something like 800 stores worldwide. I think less than 40 of those are in the USA. So you can see that with the hype, the publicity, yeah, that they've still yet to explore, really tap the US market. And I just think that, you know, any prediction of the demise of Labubu is, no, not just yet.
Not just yet, but we did say that about fidget spinners as well. So time will tell, I guess. Chuck, Nwosu, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Let's take a look at the top business news. US President Donald Trump says Coca-Cola has agreed to use real cane sugar in beverages sold in the US. Coca-Cola in the US is sweetened with corn syrup, while cane sugar is used in countries such as Mexico and in the UK. Meanwhile, the Corn Refiners Association argue that replacing high fructose corn syrup with cane sugar would actually cost thousands of jobs. And Samsung chairman Lee Yang-young has been cleared by South Korea's top court of fraud charges. Prosecutors accuse Lee of inflating the value of his pharmaceuticals firm, Samsung Biologics, through fraudulent accounting. Lee, a third-generation corporate heir, has led the Samsung Group since 2014. Turning to sport now, professional tennis player Arna Sabalenka has withdrawn from the WTA Canadian Open in Montreal due to fatigue. Meanwhile, Spanish player Paula Badosa has also withdrawn because of injury. Kathy McNally and Moyuka Ushama will replace Sabalenka and Badosa in the main draw. Wales will not be represented in the British and Irish Lions test for the first time since 1896. Lions head coach Andy Farrell said that while there have been debates, all the selectors settled on the test side combination. Welsh rugby has been on the decline somewhat since the 2023 World Cup, where they beat two-time champions Australia. And a reminder of our top stories. Israel steps up its campaign in Syria as government forces withdraw from Sweida after days of sectarian bloodshed. And the United Nations Security Council takes notice. Russia hands over 1,000 bodies of Ukrainian soldiers as part of a stalled peace effort. Its forces now push deeper into Ukrainian territory. And Trump's handling of the Epstein controversy risks dividing even his own supporters, as critics say it could threaten his grip on power. That's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. As always, you can follow us on X, and G&T with Tom Burgess-Watson is coming up next. Plus, we'll be back in a couple of hours with W News Extra. Goodbye.